Have you ever wondered if the dog, not the human, was the true architect of our shared destiny? We often look at the relationship between humans and dogs through a lens of sentimental convenience, assuming that our ancestors simply reached out a hand, offered a scrap of meat, and magically transformed a lethal apex predator into a loyal companion. But if you strip away the modern domestic comfort, the soft beds, the ceramic bowls, and the routine walks in the park, and transport yourself back to the brutal, unforgiving landscape of the late Pleistocene, the reality is far more chilling and sophisticated. You are standing in a world where the night is absolute, where the shadows are filled with creatures that view you not as a friend, but as a source of protein. In this environment, trust is not a virtue, it is a death sentence. And yet, somewhere in the murky depths of prehistory, the wolf made a gamble so audacious that it would eventually reshape the genetic makeup of two distinct species. This was not a story of human benevolence. It was a story of a calculated, biological risk taken by the most dangerous animals on the planet. A risk that ultimately forged a bond so profound, it became written into our very DNA. The conventional narrative, the one we tell ourselves to feel better about our dominance over nature, is that humans, in their infinite wisdom and kindness, plucked a few wolf pups from a den, raised them by the fire, and turned them into protectors. It is a comforting fable, but it is fundamentally flawed. When you examine the archaeological record, you find that the wolves who approached human settlements were not the docile, cute creatures we imagine today. They were aggressive, hyper-vigilant, and highly territorial. The human saved the puppy myth collapses under the weight of evolutionary biology. Instead, we must look to the self-domestication hypothesis. Think of it not as us domesticating them, but as a segment of the wolf population domesticating themselves by exploiting a new, highly stable ecological niche, the waste and refuse of human hunter-gatherer camps. In the harsh reality of the Ice Age, survival was a numbers game. For a wolf, chasing down a mammoth or a reindeer in deep snow was an exhausting, high-risk endeavor that often ended in injury or starvation. But human camps, with their piles of discarded bones, scraps of meat, and fecal matter, represented a goldmine of calories that required almost zero energy expenditure to acquire. The wolves that dared to venture closer to these human fires were the ones who possessed a specific, crucial trait, a reduced flight-or-fight response. In the wild, a wolf that didn't bolt at the sight of a human was a dead wolf. But near a camp, that same lack of fear became a survival advantage. This created a biological feedback loop. The wolves that were slightly less aggressive, slightly more curious, and slightly more tolerant of human presence survived longer, ate better, and successfully raised more litters. Over thousands of generations, this unintentional selection process did something extraordinary. It began to physically and mentally rewire the wolf. This transition was not just about behavior, it was a profound shift in cognition. As these proto-dogs began to rely on human camps, they had to solve a new set of environmental problems. They needed to understand human intent. If a human pointed to a piece of meat, a wild wolf would look at the finger, confused by the gesture. But a dog, even a primitive one, would look at the meat. This cognitive leap, the ability to interpret human social cues, is one of the most significant milestones in the history of interspecies communication. It wasn't that we taught them to understand us. It was that the wolves who could read our intentions were the ones who thrived in our presence. They were essentially learning to navigate the human social structure, treating our camps like a pack and our leaders like the alpha. This brings us to the three-pillar theory of this ancient alliance: the fire, the routine, and the social structure. The fire was the great equalizer. It provided warmth, protection from other predators, and a focal point for activity. For the wolf, the fire was a signal of predictability. Humans are creatures of habit. We sleep at night. We hunt during the day, and we return to the same locations. For a scavenger, predictability is survival. By anchoring themselves to our routines, these wolves were able to minimize the chaos of their lives. And because humans lived in tight-knit groups with clear hierarchies, the wolves found a social system that they already understood at a primal level. They didn't have to learn how to be pets, they just had to learn how to be members of a very peculiar, two-legged pack. As this relationship solidified, the biological changes became more pronounced. Studies on cranial morphology and hormonal shifts suggest that these animals began to experience the same oxytocin feedback loop that humans feel when looking into the eyes of a newborn infant. This is the look of love you see in your dog today, but its origins are purely functional. It was a mechanism for trust, a way to signal to the human pack that I am not a threat. I am one of you. Researchers like Miho Nagasawa have shown that when a dog and a human gaze into each other's eyes, both parties experience a spike in oxytocin, the bonding hormone. This was the chemical glue that turned a scavenger-human relationship into a partnership. But we must be careful not to romanticize this too much. This was a brutal evolutionary trade-off. While the dogs gained food and protection, they sacrificed their independence and, in many cases, their health. The genetic bottlenecking that occurred during this domestication process introduced a host of harmful mutations that we are still dealing with today. When we look at the archaeological evidence, such as the famous Bonn-Oberkassel dog buried alongside its human companions some 15,000 years ago, we see the culmination of this process. This was not merely a pet, this was a member of the group, a being whose life and death were intrinsically linked to the humans they lived with. They were buried with care, perhaps even with ritual, signaling that the trust had evolved into something much deeper, a shared identity. However, the village dog, the free-roaming, unbred ancestor of most modern dogs, still exists in many parts of the world today. Looking at these dogs provides a stark contrast to the highly specialized breeds we see in modern cities. Village dogs are the true survivors, the ones who kept the wild, opportunistic spirit of the original wolves while maintaining the essential social skills to live alongside us. They are the living evidence that our partnership with dogs was not a result of human engineering, but a result of a mutual, evolutionary bet. They bet that we would provide the scraps, and we bet that they would provide the warning systems and the companionship. It was a cold, hard, and incredibly successful business deal that lasted for tens of thousands of years, eventually softening into the bond we define as love today. The transition from a scavenger-scrounger to household partner was a slow, agonizingly long process. It required the wolf to lose its fear of the most lethal creature on the planet, and it required the human to overcome their instinct to kill any predator that dared to approach their hearth. This is why the question of why do dogs trust us is so profound. It isn't because they are inherently good or loyal in the human sense. They trust us because their ancestors were the boldest, most opportunistic, and most socially intelligent wolves who realized that the greatest risk living with humans was also the greatest opportunity for survival. Every time your dog looks at you, they are not just looking for a treat. They are checking the pack, assessing the reliability of their human, and confirming that the bet their ancestors made 30,000 years ago is still paying off. We think we own them, but in many ways, they have successfully integrated themselves into the core of our existence, making us just as dependent on them as they are on us. This dependence is perhaps most visible when we consider the genetic baggage that this ancient pact has left behind. While we often celebrate the diversity of modern dog breeds, from the hulking Great Dane to the diminutive Chihuahua, we rarely stop to consider the biological cost of our interference. The process of artificial selection, which began as a simple, opportunistic scavenging partnership, eventually spiraled into a form of human-driven genetic manipulation that has, in many cases, compromised the very survival traits that allowed the wolf to succeed in the first place. Studies from institutions like UCLA have highlighted how the intense bottlenecking of dog breeds has led to a proliferation of harmful mutations. We have effectively engineered away the wolf's sharp, analytical survival instincts and replaced them with specialized traits that serve our aesthetic or functional desires, often at the expense of the dog's physical longevity. This is the dark side of our trust. We took a creature that was a master of its own destiny and turned it into a creature that is fundamentally reliant on our intervention, our medicine, and our environment to survive. Yet, despite this heavy, human-imposed burden, the core of that original trust remains largely intact. When you watch a dog navigate a modern city, you are seeing a creature that is constantly performing a complex social calculus. They are not just mindless followers, they are sophisticated observers of human behavior. They track our eye movements, they interpret our tone of voice, and they monitor our emotional states with a precision that often exceeds our own capacity to understand one another. This is not just a result of training, it is a legacy of that boldness that defined the first wolves to approach our camps. They were the ones who could read the shift in a human's posture, the ones who could identify the difference between a human who was about to share a scrap of food and a human who was about to throw a spear. That ancient skill, refined over tens of thousands of years, is exactly what allows them to integrate into our modern lives so seamlessly. They are the ultimate survivors, and their survival strategy has always been us. Consider the implications of this for our own lives. We often view ourselves as the masters of our environment, the architects of our own civilization, but the history of the dog suggests a more symbiotic, perhaps even more humbling reality. We didn't just domesticate the wolf domesticated us. By creating a space for them, we changed our own daily habits. We became more territorial, more aware of our surroundings, and more socially bonded as a group because we had these watchful, sensitive creatures constantly mirroring our behavior. The dog became a catalyst for our own social evolution. They were the first technology we ever employed, a living, breathing, self-replicating alarm system and companion that allowed us to settle down to farm and to build the foundations of society. Without the dog, the human story would likely look very different. We might have remained more isolated, more vulnerable to the dangers of the wild, and less inclined to develop the deep, empathetic bonds that define our humanity today. This is why the relationship is so deeply, almost unnervingly personal. When you look at your dog, you aren't just looking at an animal. You are looking at a living artifact, a creature that carries the echoes of the Ice Age in its DNA, a witness to the entirety of human history. They have been there through every war, every migration, every technological revolution, and every personal triumph. They have watched us evolve from desperate scavengers into the masters of the planet, and they have done so by staying right by our side, adapting to our whims and our needs with a resilience that is nothing short of miraculous. They represent the most successful, long-standing, and sophisticated cross-species alliance in the history of the world. It is a partnership that has defied the odds, survived the extinction of countless other species, and evolved from a cold, opportunistic calculation into a bond that we now define, quite simply as love. But as we stand in the present, surrounded by the technology and the comforts that define our modern existence, we have to ask ourselves how much of that original, raw trust do we still deserve? We have moved so far from the reality of the fire and the hunt that we often forget the roots of this connection. We treat our dogs as fashion accessories, as emotional support tools, or as simple entertainment, often ignoring the ancestral needs that still pulse through their veins. We have domesticated them to be good, to be obedient, and to be convenient. But in doing so, we sometimes lose sight of the fact that they are, at their core, the descendants of the most audacious, independent, and intelligent predators to ever walk the earth. The trust they place in us is not a given, it is a constant, daily choice they make. Every time a dog chooses to follow you, to protect you, or to simply sit beside you in silence, they are reaffirming the ancient pact their ancestors made with yours. They are choosing to believe in the predictability of the human pack, even when we are anything but predictable. So, the next time your dog looks at you, don't just see a pet. Look at the eyes of a survivor. Look at the eyes of a creature that has been walking alongside humanity since the dawn of time, navigating our chaos, our cruelty, and our kindness with an unwavering focus. Ask yourself what they see when they look at you. Are they seeing a leader, a partner, or just another human who has forgotten the history of the fire. The truth is, the dog's trust is a mirror. It reflects our own nature back to us, showing us who we are in our most vulnerable and most powerful moments. They are the constant in our ever-changing world, the bridge between our wild past and our uncertain future. We might have invented the tools, the cities, and the laws that define our existence, but the dog helped us keep our humanity intact. Perhaps the reason we find it so difficult to imagine life without them is that, in their trusting gaze, we find the only thing that truly matters, the confirmation that we are not alone in this vast, often cold, and indifferent universe. They are the architects of our shared destiny, and as long as they are by our side, the bet their ancestors made, the bet that we were worth trusting, remains the greatest success story in the history of life on Earth.